Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about baptismal and christening records. Now, many of you who have done research here in the United States know that birth records are not readily available prior to 1900. Now, in New England, there were a lot of towns and local areas that kept birth registers, some back into the 1600s. But the further south and the further west you move, the more rare those records become. In England, civil registration or government registration of births didn't begin until 1837. And so the further back in time we go, the less likely it is that there will be birth records available for our family members. And so what that means is that we often have to turn to church records. Church records for baptisms and christenings, which lead clues to birth dates. The church has also recorded marriages and then burials, because burials were very often in a churchyard. And so those records are the records that we use to reconstruct the birth, marriage, and death dates of our ancestors. So today, we're going to look specifically at baptismal records. I'm going to show you where to find them on Ancestry.com. I'm going to show you maybe some nuances of the records that are important to understand so that you know what it is that you're looking at and what to do with that information. And then we'll talk about what else you can do with that information, or what clues that provides to lead you to more information about your family history. So let's go ahead and dive in. We are going to start with, we're going to start with where to find these records on Ancestry.com, particularly using the card catalog. Now, I know a lot of you are really tied to the concept of searching records. A lot of you search from your tree. As a matter of fact, more than half of you initiate search by clicking on the search records button on the profile of one of the people in your tree. And that's great, but every time you do that, you're searching all 12 billion, 13 billion records on Ancestry.com. And sometimes that can be a little bit overwhelming. What the card catalog allows you to do is really focus in on the specific type of record that you're looking for, the specific location that you're looking for. And so let me just show you a few tricks to using this for baptismal records in particular. You're going to find the card catalog by hovering over search. Just move your mouse over the search button, scroll all the way down and click on this button, card catalog. You're going to see here, Ancestry.com has 31,666 databases as of this moment. And you can sort these databases by any number of ways. The popularity is the default so that you get the most frequently used databases at the top of the list, but you can sort them alphabetically, or you can sort by the new stuff to see what's come online recently. We're actually today going to use this title field. I don't use it very often. I frequently will use the filters or the keyword field, but the title field allows me to see very specifically which records are online that I'm interested in. So I'm going to go ahead and type in the word baptism, and what you're going to see is there are only 7 databases on Ancestry that contain the word baptism. So this title field is actually very sensitive. It's not going to do any kind of a fuzzy search. It's going to do an exact search on what you typed in. So I might try typing in baptisms to see if that brings anything up. That brings up 102 databases. I might try typing in baptismal. That'll bring up 6 different databases. Another word that is sometimes used is christening. And so I can type that word in and see what comes up. And here's where we're going to start to see, if I add an S to that, the most number of databases. Looks like there's 31 that contain the word christenings in the database title. Now these database titles, as you can see, Ancestry tries to name them in a consistent or a uniform manner. However, sometimes it's not up to us. Sometimes we have to name it based off of the title or the information provided to us by whoever gave us the data, the archive, the library, the whatever. And so we always try to put the location first, then a name of what is included in the records, and then a date range for those particular records. So sometimes it'll come up with christening, sometimes it'll come up with christenings. Again, it just depends on the relationship that we have or the contracts that we have with the content providers that determine that. So those are kind of the variations that I would play around with. Baptism, singular or plural, the word baptismal. Christening, again, singular or plural, just to see what comes up. And every time you do this, obviously this list is not very long, so you can quickly just look through this and see if the location that you're interested in is included on this particular list. Now, Ancestry, I just ran a count this morning, kind of a rough count. We have about more than 230 million records that fall into this category, and they're from all over the United States, all over England. There are some from other countries as well, and so be sure to just look through the list and see if your specific location is included, or if you want to get really specific, you can actually add a location to that title field, and it will bring it directly up. Now, keep in mind that particularly when you're looking at English records, sometimes it's going to be listed under England, sometimes it's going to be listed under a more specific location. And so you have to make sure that you, again, play with all those variations. Might just be easier just to use the word and look through the list so that you don't miss anything. Now, there is one other word that you might not think to use, actually two, and so I'm going to throw these out there as well. Some of these records that include baptisms on Ancestry are parish registers or parish records. So instead, in the database title, instead of listing christening or baptism, it'll just be called a certain kind of parish record. So here you can see this is the largest category, 344 databases that contain the word parish in the title. That's important because parish records or parish registers are not just baptisms. What happens is in the church, the pastor or the priest would record every rite that he performed. And sometimes they're in separate sections of the same book, and sometimes they're just one right after the other. He performed a baptism, and then he performed a marriage, and then he performed 3 more baptisms, and then he did a burial, and then he did another marriage, and so they'll just kind of be all mixed up. Or, like I said, they'll be in separate sections of the book. He would record them. And so parish registers are an important way to access some of these baptismal records or christening records. So look for those as well, okay? The fourth and final category, I'm having some real language problems talking today. The fourth and final category that you would use to search for is the word or the phrase nonconformist. Here's the deal with nonconformist records. In many countries, over the course of history, there has been a state church. So the Church of England, for example, would be considered the state church, meaning that's the church that the government recognizes. So anybody who did not belong to that state church at that time was considered a nonconformist. That was the label given to them. So, Roman Catholics, Jews, Protestants, Baptists, like anybody that was not Church of England at that time would be considered nonconformist. Now, of course, that's going to change by country and through history. There are certain places and times where Catholicism is the state church, or Greek Orthodox is the state church, or whatever, right? And so you have to know a little bit about the history of the time and the place that you're researching, so that you know who is considered part of the state church and who is considered a nonconformist. But nonconformist registers do exist. And so I can type in nonconformist, and you can see here that I have nonconformist and, in this case, non-parochial registers for some locations in England. As a matter of fact, there's a large database here, 2.5 million records of nonconformist records out of England and Wales. So those are just the different search terms you're going to use in that title field in the card catalog in order to discover what kinds of church records, particularly baptismal and christening records, that are available on Ancestry.com. Now, if you find a database of interest, one you think you'll be using quite a bit, or an area where you have a lot of research to do, I would encourage you to bookmark it. You'll notice some of these databases cover hundreds of years. This Nonconformist register starts in 1567 and goes through 1970. That's 400 years. And so chances are that if you find family in that database, you'll be using that database again, maybe even more frequently than you think. And so I would encourage you to bookmark it, and there's lots of ways you can do that. You can just come here and use whatever your browser system uses as a bookmark system. Or on the homepage on Ancestry.com, one of the widgets that you can add for yourself is called My Quick Links, and you can actually add a link. You can see here I've got several Ancestry.com databases that I use quite a bit, Pennsylvania church records and Arkansas marriages, the 1940 census, where I've just added a link and included the URL. Just copy and paste this URL here into your quick links, and then it will add it to your home page so that you have a bookmark there to that particular database that you use quite a bit. So that is how you find the database. How do you find the databases in the card catalog on Ancestry? Let's talk about the different presentations of these records, and this is important because you need to understand where the records came from and what it is that you're looking at. So let's talk first about the most common thing you're going to see, which is going to be index only or transcriptions. This is the most frequent presentation of these particular records. So if I come over here, this is the England and Wales christening records from 1530 to 1906. You'll notice over here there is no browse box. Okay, if there are images attached to a database on Ancestry.com, you're going to see a browse box over here so that you can actually go through the images just like you would a reel of microfilm. In this case, the fact that there is no browse box tells me right away that there's no images attached to this particular database. And that's important to understand, again, so that you know what it is that you're looking at. Now, I can come in here and do a search, and what it's going to show me is all of the records that fit that particular search criteria. And this is all I'm going to get, right? There is no image. The reason why that's important, okay, is because that means that somebody had to index or transcribe this record, and you're reliant on their transcription, okay? And it doesn't matter whether that transcription was done, a week ago by indexers here at Ancestry.com, or if it was done, 50 years ago by somebody at a local genealogical society who then submitted this, right? The fact of the matter is without an original record, you have no way to verify this transcription. So that's just important to understand, that you're reliant on someone else's understanding of the record. Now, in this case, you'll see there are two different names, and that is kind of curious to me, that there are two names recorded for this individual. It'll give you a christening date. Now, christening and baptism, there's a subtle difference, and it depends on the denomination. Baptism is an actual official rite of the church, wherein people are either sprinkled with water or immersed in water as a symbolic thing in the church. Okay, christening has to do with being welcomed into the church, giving a child a name by which they'll be known on the records of the church. And so sometimes those things are done simultaneously as at the same event, and sometimes those are very separate events. Baptism can actually, and is in some faiths, not a birth, not an infant ordinance, right? In the LDS church, for example, children are not baptized until they're 8 years old. In the Baptist religion, adults are regularly baptized. In some faiths, anytime a new church was brought into a community, you'll see a whole group of people baptized together. And that may be the second or third time they've been baptized, but it's their significance has to do with the new church coming in. And so christening is usually going to be an infant being given a name and welcomed into the body of the church, whereas baptism can actually occur anywhere along a person's life. And that's important because this is not a birth date. Neither christening nor baptism are a birth date, and it's important to recognize that. It is just an event in their life, and hopefully there are clues, and we'll talk about this a little more in a minute, but there are clues that will lead to their birth date, but it's important that you recognize that this is not a birth date. So here's this christening on the 23rd of July, 1760 in Bristol, and then it lists the father's name, Thomas Lawrence, and the mother's name, Jane Bannister. Now you can see Bannister is maybe where that original record came from here, why she's listed as Sarah Bannister. And the fact that both names are listed here makes me wonder. It makes me want to go find the original record, because was she an illegitimate child? And so she was given her mother's name first, and then maybe her parents got married and she was legitimized. There's a lot of different things that occur historically that we need to, again, try to wrap our heads around so that we understand why records are recorded the way that they are. So oftentimes there will be additional information in the source citation and the source information that will lead you to the original or help you understand where to go to find it. But as I said, in this case, this is an index only. That's all that's been provided to Ancestry.com. So important to understand what it is that you're looking at. An index is somebody else's transcription. Now, there is another kind of an index that you're going to come across, and that's a published book. So a lot of old parish registers, genealogical societies for decades and decades and decades have been transcribing them. They'll go find the original parish record in a church, and maybe the priest won't let them take it out of the church, but he'll let them copy the information. And so a lot of these organizations would go and copy painstakingly by hand, copy this information out of these parish registers. And then they would type all of that up or create a book. And so you'll see some of those. And here's one of the ways to identify these. This is the baptismal and marriage in this case, so they're both here. Baptismal and marriage registers of the Old Dutch Church of Kingston in Ulster County, New York from 1660 to 1809. Now I've got a lot of Old Dutch New York ancestry, so that's why I pulled this book up. I'm interested in it and may spend some time with it. Now, what you'll notice over here on the right-hand side is there is a browse box. Browse this collection, right? And however, it says table of contents, which alerts me that this is a book, not necessarily a reel of microfilm that Ancestry.com has digitized. So Ancestry has digitized this book, and using these quick links, I can jump to any specific chapter or location in the book. So I could go right to the front of the book and see the publication information, the title page. There is a table of contents. If I come in here, it looks like there's also an index information in the back of the book. And then here, right in the middle of the book, are the baptismal and marriage registers. And so I can come here, pull up this set of images. Now you'll notice right here in the middle of the page, the date of these is 1660. I doubt they were typing things up in nice, neat little columns in 1660. So that's another clue that what you're looking at is in fact an addition, it's somebody's publication. Now remember, just like an index or a transcription, anytime somebody has to write information down and copy it to somewhere else, it introduces opportunities for error. So in the case of those London or those England parish registers, if you can get the original microfilm, or you can get have access to the original parish register, you're always going to want to try to locate that to verify that the information is accurate and complete. However, in the case of things like this, these particular registers, at least several of them that I'm aware of, for this Old Dutch church no longer exist. They've been lost to time or destroyed purposefully or accidentally. It doesn't matter. They just no longer exist. And so this is the only record we have of some of these baptisms and marriages. And so it's the best we've got. So we work with what we have in this case. So there's a little bit of explanatory information, and then you're going to see these are the baptisms done by this particular individual in Kingston. It lists the parents, and in this case it lists the mother's maiden name and the father's occupation, where the father was from. In this case he's from Copenhagen, and it lists that, the name of the child and the date of the baptism, and then the witnesses and sponsors. And I love this. I love these particular records because it includes this information. Some of the indexes that are created from baptismal and christening records do not include this information, and yet this is really useful information. Most often, witnesses and sponsors are family members or close associates, and it's important to record that information because you're going to see some of those same witnesses and sponsors, you're going to see their names pop up again. They're going to buy property from the grandfather, or one of these men is going to marry, the aunt or the sister, or, this is important information. So I love that it's included in these particular records. So only 2 baptisms were recorded in the entire year of 1660. A few more in 1661. And then you just use these arrows down here to arrow your way through the book, just like you were reading a book, and you can do it that way. So that's how you would use that browse feature over here. Of course, you can still search, but remember a few things. First of all is when you're searching old records, and the further back in time you get, the harder this gets. Spelling didn't matter to a lot of people. Some people didn't even know how to spell their own name. And so the variations are going to be many. That's caution number 1. Caution number 2 is, as you get into older records, sometimes they're going to be recorded in a different language. In this case, these are Dutch names, and they hadn't been Americanized yet, and we're not as familiar with some of the spellings of some of those old Dutch names. In some of the English parish registers, the further back in time you go, they may have recorded a Latin version of the child's name when they were baptized or christened. And that's important that you understand that as well. Because even though they may have always gone by some kind of a Christian name or a English name, that their name in the church records may have been recorded as a Latin name. And so you might have to look up what the Latin version of certain names are so that you know how to search, or so that you know when you find a record that you found the right person. So you can still search, but when there's a browse, I always take advantage of it because I find that super useful. Okay, so indexes and transcripts and published books. And then there are 2 final categories of the kinds of records you're going to find, and that's actual original registers, so microfilm to digital copies of the original parish registers, or what we call bishop's transcripts. Now, this is particular to England, well, mostly particular to England. A lot of the parishes would keep a record, and then they would, the priest or a secretary or somebody would transcribe those records, meaning they would create a copy in another book that they could then send on to the church or to the government. And so they have these extra copies. Again, remember, anytime somebody copies information, it introduces an opportunity for error, for something to get written wrong, for numbers to get transposed, for trouble understanding or reading the handwriting of the person who wrote it down previously. And so you end up with these bishops' transcripts, and sometimes, again, those are the only thing that still survive. But you're going to see that. Again, always look for this browse box. Here's a particular set of birth and baptism records from the London Metropolitan Archives. I actually have had the opportunity to be in the London Metropolitan Archives and to see some of these originals. They've got baptismal records that date back hundreds of years, and they have microfilmed some of them themselves, but those records were only ever available in the archives or in their local reading rooms throughout the London metropolitan area. And about 2/3 of the records had never been microfilmed, and so the only place to view them was in the archive. And like I said, I had the opportunity to view some of these, and some of them were in such poor condition that they weren't even allowed to be viewed. And so Ancestry's been working here. You'll see their little logo up here, in a partnership with them to get these records digitized and online. And it's just fantastic that these records are even available. Again, you're going to see here this browse box that allows you to choose the particular borough that your family may have come from, if you know the parish or the poor law union that they were part of, and then jump directly to a specific year. Now remember, England started keeping civil registration or government registration of births, marriages, and deaths in 1837. So there are records, church records after that, which are excellent and you should absolutely use, but there's always value, especially for those who were born before registration, that you'll want to look at those as well. Now here is an example of one of these transcripts. Okay, so this is a copy of an original parish register written neatly into this book. Here, this is baptism solemnized in the parish of Ealing in the county of Middlesex, and you'll see here when baptized, the child's Christian name, the parent's name and surname, so you've got father, mother, and then their last name, where they live, so they didn't always go to church in the same town that they lived in, the father's occupation, and then who performed the ceremony. And then I love this example because sometimes you get lucky, and in this case we do, where the person who recorded the baptism made an extra little column over here in the left that wasn't asked for, and it's entitled Born. And so what you see here is you start to get a feel for how long these people waited before they had their children baptized. And that's important because remember, baptism is not a birth date. There was a period of time in the 16th and 17th century in particular when people were required by church law to have their child baptized on the holy day following the child's birth. So the first Sunday or the first holy day. And so you'll see some children baptized when they're 1, 2, 3, 4 days old. But as time went on, that law either went away or was ignored, and people started waiting a little bit longer. Especially what you're going to see is, again, children born in colder months or months where people were more prone to illness. You're going to see people waiting longer. As infant mortality dropped, as children were living longer, sometimes they would wait a little while to have those children baptized. They had them baptized at birth, oftentimes because they were afraid for their souls and they wanted to make sure that that child was baptized before they died. But again, as infant mortality went down, as children were living longer and longer, then sometimes they waited more and more times. One of the benefits of looking at them this way is that you start to get a feel for what was appropriate or what was happening in the culture of the time and the place. So here I've got a January 8th baptism or birth and a May 11th baptism, a December 20th birth and a May 11th baptism. Apparently May 11th was a big day in the church here that year. February 22nd birth, May 11th baptism. January 25th, May 11th. February 11th, May 25th. So you start to understand what some of the gaps are. Also, you can start to look for children who are baptized in groups. So in this case, we've got a John and Elizabeth Meacock, and they had 2 children baptized on that particular day. And these children are a little bit older. This child was born the 7th of February, 1854, not baptized until the 3rd of June, 1856. So 2.5 years old. This child was born June 18th, 1855, and baptized that same June 3rd, 1856. So not quite a year old. So it looks like John and Elizabeth either came back to the church, just moved to that area, whatever, and decided to have 2 of their children baptized on the same day. So look for patterns or clusters of children that might tell a story or help you understand a little bit more about the family as well. And you can do that when you go page by page through some of these particular records. So those are the different presentations you're going to find in these particular records. In our last minute or two here, I'm just going to give you a couple of cautions. I've mentioned this before, and then talk about what to do next. So the caution is this: just be sure that you record this when you record the fact in your online tree or in Family Tree Maker, that you record this as a baptism or a christening, not as a birth date. You can see just from the examples I used there, sometimes the child was 2.5. I've seen baptisms in Church of England records, I've seen baptisms as late as 5 and 6 years old. In Baptist records, I have a great-grandfather who was baptized when he was in his 60s. And so it is a baptismal date. It is not a birth date. Now, in the case of those records we just looked at, bonus, because the birth date is actually recorded. But that will not, that's the exception, not the rule. That will not always be the case. So if you want to use the baptismal or christening fact, and those are both standard facts in your online tree and in Family Tree Maker, you can record it that way. If you really feel like you need something in that birth date field, you can use the prefix BEF, which is an abbreviation for before, and then put that date. So you can put that they were born before this particular christening date. And that will work if you're trying to use that birth date field to affect your search results to try and get kind of a lifespan search done for this particular person. Now, last couple of things here that I would encourage you to do when you're doing any kind of search in a specific database. Always look for family groups. And I don't care if this is our database of Arkansas marriages or a database of English baptismal records. I would hope that when you do searches, you're always looking for entire families for a lot of reasons. The main reason being sometimes those other siblings contain the clues you need to discover who the parents and grandparents are. The other reason, which is actually more important to me, is that we're telling the stories of our families, and these people did not live in isolation with their parents. They had brothers and sisters, and those brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and cousins contributed to that family story. And so always look for other children of the same couple. There are some quick and easy ways to do that. Let me go back here to these England and Wales christening records and use Sarah Bannister Lawrence here as an example. So remember, Sarah was christened in 1760 in Bristol. Her parents are Thomas and Jane. So what I can do is I can actually come in here and scroll down to this family member, and I can say I want everybody who has a father named Thomas and a mother named Jane and that location of Bristol, and just do a search that way. And you can see here now there are some other possibilities. Now in this case, these possibilities are not possibilities because they're born 60 years apart. But I would bet that this Mary Jane and this Elizabeth are related. Their christening dates are just a year apart. And that's what you're going to look for. You're going to look for children who are christened a year to 18 months apart. And anytime you see a gap, that's a clue that maybe a child was born and died, or that the family moved away for a time. Again, it starts to tell the family story. So always look for other children. The other benefit of locating other children is that you can identify who the oldest child is in that family oftentimes. And that's important because then it gives you a time frame to know where to look for a marriage record. Now, you noticed in some of these databases, these marriage records are recorded in the same database. In some of them, they're an entirely separate database, and so you need to go look for that same parish and see if Ancestry.com has marriage records available to locate the marriage record for those parents, that couple. And then one of the things I use it for is just to look for the commonality of the surname in a particular location. That becomes important because I want to understand how likely it is that I'm going to have to sort out a lot of people with the same name. The further back in time you go, one of the things that you'll discover, if you haven't already, is that people were less creative with their names. So you'll end up with a lot of, Sarah, Mary, Elizabeth, John, Michael, Matthew. You'll end up with a lot of people with some of those same names, very often in the same families. You'll end up with 3 cousins all born about the same time in the same parish with the same name. And so understanding how common that surname is in that location helps me sort out some of those common ancestors. Well, that is where you're going to find those baptismal records, just some cautions about using them, some clues about using them, and some ideas about what to do next. That's all I have for you today. If you're watching this live, I'll be on chat in just a few minutes to answer any additional questions you may have. I'm also putting together our February calendar of events today, so if you have any suggestions for topics you'd like to see addressed, please email me at ask@ancestry.com, and I will take a look at those and see if we can't get some of those topics scheduled in February. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.